How would you describe living wisely as compared to living foolishly? And then the next question is, do you? Or the next question is, which do you do? Wise living is optimal and should be pursued, and foolish living sounds like it ought to be avoided. In this discussion, we're going to be seeing what makes up wise living and foolish living, and some things we can do to make adjustments in perhaps the way we're living now. And we'll do that when we come right back. Hi, and welcome to Bible Study with Friends. I'm here with my friend Stan Ford. We're continuing our study in the book of Ecclesiastes. Very interesting chapter today. If you read chapter 7, you might go, whoa, Stan and I were just talking about that off camera. This has been a challenge to read, hasn't it?
It has been, especially the first 4 verses.
Now, Solomon is talking into this first half of chapter 7 about the contrast between a life lived in wisdom and a life lived in foolishness. And he's setting up a contrast. Now, what makes this difficult to study and really apply to our lives is he uses a lot of metaphors and similes. In fact, at one point he says life is like a thorn bush burning. And so that's a simile that it's hard to do because a lot of these are local colloquialisms. In fact, we're going to see that in the very first verse of chapter 7. So let's get into that. Yeah. You ready to go?
I am.
All right. Living wisely and living foolishly. And we're going to see Solomon's take on that and hopefully clarify some things, make it a little bit clearer for all of us. Verse 1, right out of the chute, we start to get some confusion to the modern person reading this. A good name is better than a good ointment. What is he? We'll see. And the day of one's death is better than the day of one's birth. So he's using some things that we need some clarification on, and hopefully.
Yeah.
Now, what's a good name? What's another? It's in my notes. It's, if you cheat, you can read my notes. The idea of a good name is your reputation, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. So he's saying a good reputation is better than a good ointment. Now, I want you to flip over to a verse. Look at Job chapter 29, verse 6.
When my steps were bathed in butter and the rock poured out for me streams of oil.
The idea of a good ointment or good oil was a metaphor for blessing. So he's basically saying having a good reputation is better than just having somebody say, bless you. A good reputation is important, and it's better than having somebody just give you a blessing. Because a good reputation is real. It's where you've lived.
A good reputation.
Good reputation. Now, when you're born, do you have a reputation?
No.
Okay. But when you die, you have lived. You have lived your reputation, right?
Yeah.
So if a reputation is a good thing, it's better to die having lived well and wisely and have a good name than it is when you were born, you got a clean slate.
Yeah.
There hasn't been an opportunity yet to live wisely. So there's no reputation. So he's basically saying having a good name and being able to show people what living wisely looks like is better than just being born with a clean slate. You see the context?
Yeah.
So when you're reading something like that, remember the context of the verse, not only in the chapter, but even the context of the verse within its own verse. Okay?
Yeah.
So he's talking about a good reputation, and he's saying it's better the day of one's death because your reputation is intact, where your birth There's nothing yet.
Yeah. People remember your reputation, whether it be good or bad.
But the day you're born,
You don't have anything.
there's nothing to remember.
Yeah.
That's what he's talking about here.
Yeah.
This is an idea. It's a good reputation is better than somebody just saying bless you and not living it out. And it's better to have a reputation than to not have one.
Yeah.
Now that was the beginning. That was the beginning of this section in this about wise and foolish living. That was a verse almost by itself, because now he starts to get into counseling us, the reader, on what wise living and what foolish living looks like in life. And and the reason you see this wise and foolish thing is I went through and marked. Look at this. We go wise, fools, wise, fools, wisdom, foolishness. So there's this, he's contrasting. Okay.
Yeah, because he says that it is better, I think, 8 or 9 times in these verses, these first 8 or 9 verses.
Exactly. So there's this contrast. It's better to do this than to do this.
Yeah.
So that continues in verse 2. It's better to go to a house of mourning than go to a house of feasting, because that is the end of every man, and the living takes it to heart. Now, here's what this is a hard, just taking it at face value. So let's do a little understanding here. The house of mourning is a funeral.
Yeah.
They didn't have funeral parlors. They had funerals in homes. And it's better to go to a funeral than it is to go to a party. Okay? Now, why would that be the case? Now, at a funeral, I don't know about you, but I've been to funerals where it is a natural thing to be sitting there and be thinking about life and thinking about death, right?
Yeah.
And evaluating not only the life and death of the person that the funeral is for, but also in yourself. It's a natural thing to say, death is coming.
Yeah.
And he makes that point. He says, because this is the end of every man. And what is the end of death? He said that earlier in the book of Ecclesiastes. So he says, it's better to go to a funeral than it is to a party. Why? Because at a funeral, I'm going to seriously think about life. And at a party, I might be too busy hooping and hollering than to really seriously consider. So the death is coming. So the idea is you don't want to go through life fooling yourself that you're going to live forever.
Yeah. Yeah, because at a party, you're not thinking about those kind of things.
No, you're thinking about how it feels. This feels great.
Yeah.
There are people who go through life never admitting to themselves that they're going to die. They're so busy having a great time. I run into this all the time with people that I'm too busy having a good time. I'm too busy with my career. I'm too busy. I don't want to think about death. The idea is it's better to seriously think about the death you're going to have and live according to that serious thought than it is just to be partying all the time. You see what he's saying?
Yeah. Because at a death, people are more somber, more thinking, especially if you go to the funeral of someone your own age.
Yes.
In your age group.
Yeah. And now he finishes it with, at the end, the living takes it to heart. That's this idea of thinking. You go to a funeral home and you take it to heart that, hey, I need to take life seriously because everybody dies.
Yeah.
And so I need to be realistic that I'm not going to live forever. So my good reputation becomes something I'm concerned about. Therefore, I need to live wisely as compared to live foolishly. Do you see where he's going?
Yeah.
All right. So now he's going to start some advice. And he says, sorrow is better than laughter. For when a face is sad, a heart may be happy. Now, it's interesting because it's saying that it's better, in light of verse 2, to go through life serious than it is that song that said, don't worry, be happy.
Yeah.
There are times when you don't worry, but there are times when you really should seriously consider your life. And you may look like you're being really serious and really, but inside your heart, you're happy. Why? Because you are really deciding to live a wise path rather than a foolish path that could lead to really disaster. You have to read through what he's saying because he's using a lot of colloquialisms that a mind in Israel at this time would have understood what he's talking about.
Yeah. It's like I said, these first 4 verses are difficult.
And then he goes right into the fourth verse. The mind of the wise is in the house of mourning, while the mind of fools is in the house of pleasure. And that goes back to what I just said a minute ago up in verse 2, that it's really wise to seriously consider your life, to sit down and say, this is no party. I'm going to seriously consider my life. That's the mind of a wise person, where the mind of a fool is just saying, hey, this is all about having a good time. That in people that say, I'm having a good time because when you die, you feed the worms. There's nothing to life after death. Yes, there is. God is waiting. Now, he said that earlier in the earlier chapters. God is waiting for judgment, and everybody's going to die. So the comparison of wisdom and foolishness is a wise person seriously considers what's coming, and a foolish person just parties.
Yeah.
So you see, it's much better to seriously take life than to say, oh, it's never going to end. It's always going to be a party, and you end up wasting your life and you have no reputation at the end other than, oh, he was a party animal. If you see somebody that doesn't have a care in the world, and not because he's got it all under control, but because he's ignoring it. I don't want to think about death, that kind of thing. When you see that, and you might come and say, listen, you need to take life seriously, my friend. Life is not a party that will never end. You have to take things seriously. Now, that's the next verse. Verse 5 says, it is better to listen to the rebuke of a wise man than for one to listen to the song of fools. So if 2 friends came to you and one said, hey, listen, you need to do some planning. You need to think about your future. You need to get your education. You need to settle down. Think about your reputation that you're building through life. So get serious. That's the rebuke of a wise man.
Yeah.
Whereas the other friend says, hey, don't worry about the future. Let's party. Now, that conversation has happened in colleges all over America, all over the world, where you go to college and all of a sudden it's party time. And somebody is going to come to you and say, look, you need to take these years and really get a good foundation for life.
Yeah.
And then the other guy says, nah, let's go for pizza. Let's go out and drink. Let's just have a good time.
Yeah. When I was in the workforce, I had people under me, and I had a lot of young people, and I would try to encourage them to go on to college and get their education. And I got time for that. I got time for it. And I would press on them, say, time goes by fast. And
it does. So this idea, again, is the contrast. It's wise to listen to that kind of wise counsel.
Yeah.
It says, for as the crackling of thorn bushes under a pot. So it's better to listen to the rebuke of a wise man than to listen to the song of fools, because it's like the crackling of a thorn bush under a pot. You go, what? He says, so is the laughter of the fool. And this too is futility. Now, let's see what it's talking about here in this idiom of the crackling of a thorn bush. Now, a thorn bush, when you burned it, it burned bright. It flamed up and went and made a lot of noise.
Yeah.
It says that, the crackling of the thorn bush. But it didn't produce heat. It was
burns
all
out
flame.
quickly.
It was all just big, bright flame, and it didn't produce anything that heated the pot.
Yeah.
So he's saying it's better to listen to the wise than to just the song of fools, because it's like crackling under a pot that's a lot of noise, but there's no heat. There's nothing is accomplished. The pot's not heated. And it says, so is the laughter of fools. It's all noise. You go to a party and there's all this noise and laughter, and a little bit of that's okay. And he's going to talk about that in a second. But if that's all you have in your life, it's like a thorn bush that's bright but no heat.
Yeah, because I have burnt thorn bushes off a fence line, and like you said, it burns quickly, doesn't give out any heat.
Yeah, and then it's gone.
It's just
there's no sitting there and heating the pot. It's just gone. Now he goes on. Oppression makes a wise man, and a bribe corrupts the heart. And a wise man sees that and becomes angry, where the foolish man says, hey, this is an opportunity to make some money, and it corrupts the reputation. Remember the reputation we started with? That good reputation. He's a guy who takes bribes. There's no good reputation there. But a wise man sees that corruption and is angry about it. The end of a matter is better than its beginning. Patience of spirit is better than haughtiness of spirit. Now, that end of a matter is better than the beginning goes back to the funeral is better than the birth, because the funeral is the end of the matter of wise living.
Yeah.
And so it goes back to that same thing. The patience, those who are patient of spirit, is better than haughtiness of spirit. And this haughtiness of spirit is saying, hey, don't advise me to live wisely, because I'm having a great time. And I'm really haughty about, hey, life is a party. That's haughtiness. That's not being serious. That's the song of fools rather than the song of the wise that we get. You see where he's going with this, with counsel?
Yeah.
Basically taking life seriously. Now, let's keep going down here. Verse 9 says, don't be eager in your heart to be angry, for anger resides in the bosom of fools. Now, you can remember the verse that Jesus said, be angry, but do not sin?
Yeah.
And he says, don't let the sun go down on your anger.
Yeah.
So it's okay. Up above, it says, a wise man sees corruption and becomes angry. Okay?
Yeah.
But then it says, but don't be eager to be angry in your heart. Don't let that anger for the corruption stay there and live there. Because then you become bitter. Then you become an angry old man. So it's better. Anger resides, it stays there in the bosom of fools. The angry old man is wasting his life being angry instead of living his life wisely and building a good reputation.
Anger, in a footnote on the side, it says are hasty. Do not be hasty.
Don't be quick to anger.
Yeah.
Remember, Jesus said, don't be quick to anger, be slow to speak.
Yeah.
Don't have a hair trigger temper.
Yeah.
Now, he keeps going. This is just advice. Don't say, why is it that the former days were better than these? For it is not from wisdom that you ask about this. Now, what the former days? Now, in the context of angry. Now, okay?
Yeah.
Don't let the anger abide in you. And don't be thinking about how good it was in the former days. So what's he talking about there? Listen, Stan, you and I have had conversations with people that say, back in the good old days,
Yeah.
it was really good. And now it's terrible. And they're angry at the way life is now.
Yeah.
Because they're continually looking back at the good old days.
Yeah.
Right? And he's saying here, look, don't do that. He says, do not say, why is it that the former days were better than these days? So this is not from wisdom that you ask this. It's not wise to be looking back. Jesus said, hey, when you put your hand to the plow, Don't be constantly looking back. Be looking ahead.
Yeah.
So don't be thinking, oh, back in the good old days, it was different. And you start to get upset about why isn't it like the good old days? And you look at kids and you say, these kids aren't like the good old days where the kids, whatever it is. And you end up being angry at life because it's not like the good old days. And that's a warning.
Yeah.
That's not wise to do. And if you do that, you should stop. Because he says, do not say. That's an emphatic. And then he keeps going. Verse 11, wisdom along with an inheritance is good and an advantage to those who see the sun. Now here again is confusing. Wisdom with inherited wealth is a good thing because you're wise to use that inheritance correctly.
Yeah.
And it says, and this is an advantage to those who see the sun. Now, earlier in the book, he said there's nothing new under the sun. And that term under the sun means in the big picture.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So it's basically saying here, it's an advantage to be wise, to use inheritance wisely. To those who see the sun is who those who see the big picture, who those who see the whole of creation, so to speak, those who see life as the big picture of coming. And nothing new is under the sun, but under the sun, if I'm wise, I can use my inheritance to build a good reputation. You see where his advice is going?
Yeah, he kind of explains a little bit about that in verse 12.
That's right. For wisdom is protection, just as money is protection. Now, some versions, that word protection means shadow. And you remember the verse that says the living in the shadow of the Most High is like living under his wing.
Yeah.
And that's this protection idea the translators are helping us with. For wisdom is protection, just as money is protection. But the advantage of knowledge is that wisdom preserves the lives of its possessors. So it is not taking the inheritance and blowing it. It's taking the inheritance and wisely preserving that inheritance and for a good reputation, for life, my child's life, his child's life, that whatever. This is wise use of money.
Yeah.
Now, then he goes on and he says, verse 13, I want to do 13 to 18 very quickly here. In 13 or 14, it ends up one section. It says, consider the work of God. Now he's bringing God in. This has all been the natural man's perspective. Now he's bringing God into the picture. Consider the work of God. For who is able to straighten what he has been? In other words, don't be living life mad at God because of the way things are. Don't be looking back at the good old days and saying, now, boy, God has really messed me up now. It's saying, no, consider this the will of God for you.
Yeah.
And move on wisely through it. And he says in verse 14, in the day of prosperity, be happy. But in the day of adversity, consider. Now, this isn't be happy when you're doing good and when you're not doing good, be mad. It's when things are going good, be happy, rejoice. But when things are going bad, think about it. Consider what's going on. That's that wise consideration that he's been talking about since verse 1. And he says, consider, God has made the one as well as the other. So remember the verse that talks about that the rain falls on the righteous and the wicked?
Yeah.
And the sun shines on the righteous and the wicked. God has set up daylight to make an effect on our lives and night to make an effect on our lives. The good times are good. The bad times make us think and make us grow because we're considering what's going on in our lives. And God makes both available to us, and we need to take it as that. and not just be angry. God has done this to my life and I'm mad at him. Unemployment, for example. I've spent a significant amount of time unemployed in my life. And instead of getting angry at God, I said, okay, what has God given me this time to learn? What has God given me to grow in this circumstance? And we think he did. God has made one as well as the other. And the very end of verse 14, so that man will not discover anything that will be after him. Now, what do you think that's saying?
I struggle with that this week with a lot of the other verses.
Okay.
And
Put it in perspective this way, Stan. This idea that God has made good things and negative things equally in our lives so that we won't be able to say, oh, these are good things are happening. So good things are always going to happen to me, or bad things are happening. So only bad things are going to happen to me. So God has given us a balance in our lives of good and bad, the bad to help us grow, the good to help us enjoy. But he's done that so that we can't say, oh, he's being blessed right now, so his whole life's going to be nothing but blessing. Looking into the future, it's going to be nothing but blessing. No, into the future, there's going to be some negative. And God does that so that we cannot make assumptions on our life, so that we can't say, here's my current situation. It's always going to be this way. Or this is my situation and there's no getting out of it.
Yeah.
That leads to suicide. Oh, this is terrible and I don't see any end to it, so I'm just going to pull the plug. No.
Yeah.
God has created the good and the bad as a balance in our lives so that we will not make assumptions on living, and instead, go back to verse 1, we will work on a good reputation, because a good reputation in life because of wise living. And he's gone through what wise wisdom looks like, especially verse 7 to verse 12. Read through yourself again. This idea of wise living is much better than assuming life's going to be one way or the other. Well, we've been talking about foolish living and wise living. And I want to recommend a video to you called How Should a Christian Live? From the book of Colossians. I hope it's a blessing to you. If it is, be sure to subscribe and like these videos. And listen, we're going to continue on in our study in Ecclesiastes next week. So until then, God bless you.